Welcome. My name is Joshua Orson. I am a BA social worker. I am in a master's of social work program out of Simmons College and Simmons University. Simmons is located in Boston, Massachusetts, and actually is the first social worker program in the entire country. They created it. So it's a respected program, and well, I was having a conversation with a friend of mine last night, and he suggested that I start a podcast and dive into the world of social work in a way that anybody can understand it. I think that social work is something that people all know but don't totally get. And so we are going to dive into the world of social work. And you guys are lucky because I'm going to teach you what I'm learning. You're going to learn with me. You're going to get a school education for free. That's pretty good. Internet's pretty cool that way. Thank you. Don't let my professors know this, or they're going to ask you for credit money. So we're going to go into the world of social work in a way that everybody can understand social work, because you don't need to be a social worker to appreciate social work. You don't need to be about that environment, but everybody wants to help. You know, in 2020, we've seen advocacy towards improvement for the lives of African Americans in the country, and questioning about the police department. How do we relate communities to the federal government? How do we work to be the best person we can be, and we can make a social change? You know, you can think of the great leaders like Martin Luther King, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Abraham Lincoln. This here in the United States, people who said, what are the problems that we need to work on, and how can we do it to better the environment for everybody? Social work is about what's better for everybody. And an example that I like to think about that a professor taught me when I was in undergrad is an elevator. You know, you go into a building, it's a couple stories, they have elevators. Elevators are required in all public buildings, but that wasn't the case until the early 1990s. George H. Bush, first President Bush, was in office when the American with Disabilities Act was signed. ADA is a type of legislation that requires making things efficient and possible for everybody. And he said, you know, he was very smart. He said, I'm not going to tell you guys, because a lot of businesses say, we're not going to, you don't have to put an elevator in, but if you don't, we won't pay federal funding. And they did it. Now every building has it. But an elevator, does an elevator just benefit somebody who has physical disabilities? No. You may not want to walk up those stairs. Maybe it gets you huff and puff. Maybe it's too many stairs. People take the elevator all the time. An elevator doesn't just benefit somebody with disability, it benefits everybody. And that's something called universal design. Universal design says, how can we do something that betters not for everybody? And we as social workers are working towards that level of universal design. How can we advocate for everybody? How can we better the lives for everybody? Not just 1, 2, 3 people, not just the people on top of the 1% of that holds just a giant percentage of the money. How can we better it for everybody? So potholes, filling potholes benefits everybody, not just the state, but it benefits not just the cars that it affects. It saves the emergency services have to come and deal with it when the car needs to get towed. It saves. There's more rippling effects. And what we're going to learn through this podcast is that social work is a rippling effect. A lot of actions have reactions. Actions have consequences that are greater than the actual um, problem that we're trying to solve. And we're going to go into how to solve problems and the greater effects that having those problems be solved. A lot of times you can't even predict all the benefits that are going to occur or all the negativities that are going to occur, all the negative consequences that occur as a result of changing policy, changing how we do things. What do we do to better? But before we get to all that, we need to define what social work is. Social workers help people cope with the challenges they face in their everyday lives. You see people through clinical workers, you see people through working individual treatment, you see people working for group treatment, you'll find social workers in hospitals, you'll find social workers in the VA. They're people that work to advocate for all people. And to really understand social work, you need to understand something called NASW. And NASW is the National Association of Social Workers. They are the overarching rules. It's like the Bar Association of Lawyers. Social worker, you follow X, Y, Z. But to really understand it, we have the Code of Ethics, which was created in 1996, but was redone in 2017. But the idea is that there is meant that I think the most important line is just the very first paragraph. I'm just going to read it to you very quickly because I think it's important. The primary mission of the social work profession is to enhance the human well-being and help meet the basic human needs of all people, with particular attention to the needs and empowerment of people who are vulnerable, oppressed, and living in poverty. A historic and defining feature of social work is the profession's focus on individual well-being in a social context and the well-being of society. Fundamental to social work is attention to the environmental forces that create, contribute, and address to problems in living. And that's what we're going for. We are here to address problems. How can we do something that's not just good for me, it's good for everybody? That's universal design. And a lot of social work is based on the concept of universal design. How can we better the world for everybody? So you go to an intersection. And I'm going to use this example a lot during this podcast because I think it's a very good example. And in a couple other, in a future podcast episode, I'm going to explain more as to the nitty gritty. But if you go to an intersection, four-way intersection, right? No stop sign, no light, right? Dangerous intersection. I think everybody can think of a dangerous intersection in their neighborhood where they're just like, this is not safely designed. You've probably been in a car before. Why isn't there a stop sign here? Why isn't there a light here? A social worker looks at that and says, how can we get this here? Because we're trying to better the lives and enhance the lives of everybody. So let's think about who gets affected by no light. Well, if you're walking, you're a pedestrian, and it's a dangerous spot, and cars can go flying down the road and don't have to slow down, that can be a danger to the pedestrian. To drivers, well, you drive through and you're not sure when to go through when there's a heavy chance of accidents. Maybe that's a section that's known for accidents. Maybe it's speeding. Maybe people who drive know that I can go as fast as I want down this road. No reason to slow down. And that can be a danger. It can be a danger to the other drivers. It can be a danger to pedestrians. It can be a danger to a lot of people. So we as social workers say, having that stop sign here will improve the lives for everybody, not just people in the community, but everybody. Sometimes you got to learn how to do an intersection, right? But we here at Social Workers say, how are we going to change this? How are we going to get that stop sign there? And that's a simple example, and I'm going to go into the nitty gritty later on how we actually get there. But that's the kind of mindset we have as social workers. Now, that's a simple model, but social workers work on much larger topics. So topics like poverty, topics like racism, topics like discrimination, getting higher pay for people, right? Simple things that improve the lives of others. And I'm sure the work that was done through ADA, a lot of that was done because of social workers. Social workers got up there and said, this is an issue. Somebody who's cannot physically use the stairs has at a complete disadvantage. That's not appropriate. That's not fair. Elevators worked to improve that, and the Bush administration worked, and people forget about ADA, but that's one of the great civil rights legislations of the last 30, 40 years. Women worked for suffrage. African Americans worked for voters' rights and to break segregation and to be treated as equals. Last year, we've seen the Black Lives Matter movement work to bring attention to the problems regarding our police force and how they treat the community. When people advocate and stand up, we can start the process to make a difference. It's not going to solve the problem, but we can start the process. And we as social workers are working every single day to try to better the lives for people. Universal design does not just work for people with disability. If we change our police force to better the lives of all people, does that only benefit African Americans, or does it benefit everybody? It benefits everybody. That's universal design. And we must advocate for that. It's not just our responsibility as social workers, it's our responsibility as Americans. Now, you don't need to be a social worker to take the ideas from this course and this podcast to better the lives for people, because I'm sure at some point in your life, somebody advocated for you. Somebody got up there and said, how can I help you? Maybe you had I'd like you to think of your life as somebody who you would consider a mentor, who helped build and develop you into a way that you are today. Somebody that really drove you. And I'm going to start with myself. And one thing I'll be very honest about in this podcast is that I struggled with learning disabilities. I have a learning disability. I was called nonverbal learning disorder or nonverbal learning disability, depending on the language that you want to use. I prefer disorder because disability, doesn't feel as good, but it's what it is. The connotation changes, but I found this out. I would struggle in school, and I worked super hard, and we had these little vocab quizzes, these little silly orange book vocab quizzes. And I would study for hours, because, as a kid, getting good grades was what you did for work. I mean, that's really what it was. And then I'd come in and I'd do okay, maybe a B. Now, there's this other kid in class. I'll never forget this kid. The kid was probably like 6 foot, a little overweight. He'd brag all the time. I just looked at the words for a class and I got 100. But for me as a high schooler, I just couldn't believe, why can't I do this? Why do I work so many hours, study so many hours, and I get an okay grade, and this guy comes in and looks at the words 5 minutes before class and gets an A? I thought it was unfair. I couldn't understand it, but my brain works differently. I was diagnosed with nonverbal learning disability sometime around the 9th, 10th grade, maybe. And I ended up, I was first in very much denial of my learning issues. And I would say, no, absolutely not. That's not me, blah, blah, blah. And I started doing a little research and I said, oh my God, I can see some similarities. My brain doesn't do well with multiple choice. I took the SAT in high school and I did okay. I didn't do great on the multiple choice. I scored an okay score on that test, which, by the way, I'd be interested to see how I do now. I've thought about that, but that's a different story for a different day. I always like, if you could take a look at your SAT and do it now as an adult, how you do. Bunch of words you never actually use in real life. But I scored an 11 out of 12 in my essay. See, multiple choice, I don't do well. When I don't do well, when I have something that's close to the answer, I always have like the answer that's almost right, and then the one that was more right, I would always go with the one that was almost right. Or I'd oftentimes go with the one that's almost right. That's just how my brain doesn't work that way. But in an essay, I killed it. I got an 11 out of 12. My score wasn't great because I did really well in the essay. I didn't do well in the multiple choice. But I ended up meeting a gentleman named Dr. Mooney. Dr. Mooney is located in Vermont on the border of Canada, and he is really considered one of the world experts on nonverbal learning disability. And I met with this man, and he advocated for me, learned more about me, he taught me for who I am, and I learned more about myself. I learned strategies to work to become a better student. And I went to college and I did okay. And it was pretty impressive considering all the issues I had. My goal as a social worker is to get to a place where I can say, how can I want learning disabilities not to be seen as something negative. I just want them to be seen as something that's part of you. I want a basketball player who I think of gifted, he has to work. Is. And that's who I am. And podcast to be. I want this podcast community to learn about you. How can you help everybody? We are here as social workers to advocate for everybody. I'm not saying you have to be a social worker, but you can make a difference for your community. The Code of Ethics describes the core values that through history social workers have worked for: service, social justice, dignity, and worth of the person, importance of human relations, integrity, and competence. Service, social justice, dignity, and worth of the person, importance of human relations, integrity, and competence. These are things that you don't need to be a social worker to say, these are ideals that are important to me. We are here to benefit the lives of all people. We are here because our NASW Code of Ethics gives us 6 reasons we're here. That we're here to be based on the social workers' missions, set a specific standard, help relevant, identify and work on conflict issues and figure out problems, make the general public aware of these problems, help socialize practitioners in a way to make the social workers' mission, values, ethical principles, and standards part of everyday life, and to assess where we as social workers can be better. We are never perfect. We're human beings. We have to get better. And that's what I want from this podcast. A simple area where we can say, how can you be better? Social workers are not going to get you a gazillion dollars. You're not going to be the richest person in the world. But you'll be able to provide mental health counseling to individuals, groups, or families, conduct initial assessments of client situations, needs, and goals, research and advocate for appropriate public assistance, communicate with client care team, provide crisis intervention, refer individuals to appropriate treatment centers, ensure that all case files and other records strictly comply with policies, regulations, and procedures. We're going to coordinate treatment plans. We're going to work with outpatient, inpatient, and we'll be actively participating in ongoing training in order to meet certification standards. These are all things that you get, and you're a constant learner. That's the beautiful thing about social work, is that you're going to keep on learning throughout your life. If you like to learn, then social work is good, because there's so many things that we can work on. Your education, you're going to looking for licensing. You're going to be, but what I'd like to talk about in this particular podcast are some of the skills that make you into a better social worker. These are some of the things that we all can work on. Active listening is the first one. You have to be able to give your client their full attention. When years ago, I worked on the suicide hotline. I did that for about a couple months. And we were taught something really interesting. It's like, you can get a phone call from anybody. So you get a phone call for someone who actually thinking about suicide. But you might just get a phone call from somebody whose dog barks too loud next door and it bothers them because they have difficulty sleeping. Now you might in your head say, this isn't a big issue. But to them, it's a big issue. It's a problem to them. And we don't care. We don't compare. We don't say that your problems are less than their problems. We might lessen the amount of time we have to talk. So on the suicide hotline, we have an amount of time our conversation go on based on the severity of the phone call. But you give them their full attention, right? Their problem is important to you, even if it's really not. It is. If it doesn't seem important in the grand scheme of things, well, it's important to them, so it's important to you. Verbal communication. Your clients will be depending on you to convey information to them, their families, and other service providers. A lot of times we're like a language communication, right? If you're in a situation with a family and there's a possibility of abuse, the social worker might be the one that has to come in and do the 51A, do the help take the kid out of the situation, and then you're going to be the one communicating between the family and the child. Right? You're here as a communication. You want to make sure that the family understands, the child understands, everybody's on the same page. Again, universal design, everybody should be on the same page. You're going to improve your interpersonal skills. In addition to listening and speaking skills, you need social skills so you can connect with people. You're going to listen to people, have conversations. You're going to hear things that you probably never heard before. You're going to see things you maybe never saw before. You need to be able to organize and listen and be able to say, hey, let me walk into here and what can I do? It's what my regional director of the company, I work for a company called Communities for People. And we work with kids through foster care, something called the DCF, is the Department of Children, Youth, and Families. DYS, Department of Youth Services. DCF deals with foster care kids. DYS deals with kids through the correction system. You're going to get all these different types of experiences. You're going to have kids that may have not had family. Maybe they've had to be forced to be separated from their family. And you're going to have to be the one to connect. Because those kids need somebody. You don't have to solve all the problems, but you can have a conversation. Take the kid out for lunch. It might mean more to them than you realize. In life, it's not about the presence, it's about the presence. But my program director, regional director, he would say, you need the Jason Bourne effect. You need to be able to walk into a room and know your surroundings. Safety issues, sure, but understand you walk into a room and you notice that the kid's laundry's all over the floor. Maybe they got stains on their shirt. Maybe you walk into the kitchen and notice no food. These are little things that you can see, and you start recognizing more and more as you do the work. In this work, you're going to improve your time management and organizational skills. You're going to get in a lot of cases. You have a lot of responsibility. These are people's lives you're working with, right? You need to make sure you manage your time. Remember that your case, your most difficult case, isn't your only case. You're going to improve your time management skills as a social worker. And most importantly, you're going to improve your critical thinking. You need to be able to weigh the strengths and weaknesses of alternative solutions when helping with your clients. You're not dealing with a product, you're dealing with people. You know, if a business goes under, there's ramifications for the owner, right? And it can be issues for the employees, and this is the same thing, but this isn't a product, these are people. You have people with real problems and need real solutions. And you can be those real solutions. That's a beautiful thing. So it's important to think less politically and more logically. You know, we're living in a day and age where people are very, very opinionated, right? Politics has dominated the way people think. We're apolitical. We're not, we may agree with one party's ideals when it comes to something. We may disagree with another party's ideals, but we're apolitical. We're here to solve problems. And if, remember, these are kids or these are adults or whatever age you choose to work with, whatever population you work with, you are going to have real lifetime effects on these kids. Just to give you an idea, like of the pay, the average salary is about $50,000, but the top make $81,000. Here in Massachusetts, about $81,000. You can make a good living. I mean, you're not gonna make a fortune. You make a living. You can. Some of the challenges that you might face with this type of work include areas of dealing with physical and mental abuse, child care, domestic violence. You might deal with rape victims, right? You can really, there's all types of areas. And if you think of problems, think of people, and think of someone